Hi, folks. It's Jessica from Chambray Blues Sewing. I'm here with an update on some things that are going on in the sewing industry. About a month ago, there was an article that I came across by the Craft Industry Alliance talking about tissue paper sewing patterns and what's going on with them right now. So if you have ordered from the big four pattern companies such as McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity, um, or Vogue, you know that there has been big delays receiving paper patterns in the mail. And the reason for that is that back in October, the one printing facility that was left in the US that made tissue paper patterns was the victim of a malware attack on their computer system. It was so bad that it completely shut down their printing presses to the point where they can't even turn anything on. And if you've ever been in a printing facility, you know that these facilities today are mostly automated with computers. There's very little hands-on, very few people that work in these kind of places. It's all computerized. So they haven't been able to print anything. And going forward in this spring of 2021, and definitely by summer 2021, there is going to be a lack of tissue paper sewing patterns. They're not going to make them anymore unless they can get these computers up and running. And there has not been any information released, any kind of update saying that they're making progress in doing this. My guess is that it's going to cost more to fix than it's worth. So if you haven't tried PDF sewing patterns, you need to change your thinking on this, because the sewing industry is making a big change, making a big pivot. And if you want to stay in the know and stay with the cool kids, you need to figure out how to make these sewing patterns work for you. So a couple of things. I'm not saying this just because I sell PDF sewing patterns, because obviously I do, but it's been coming for a long time. So when I was in college in New York City back in the 90s, there were a number of professors at FIT, where I went to school, who had said that the sewing industry is antiquated. I knew that way back then. It was obvious. Things were not being current, not being made current the way they should have been, even way back then. They were slow to use computer systems. They were slow to use drawing programs to do their sewing patterns. They still haven't done anything with photographs in the sewing instructions that a lot of us indie pattern designers do, all these kinds of things. So the smaller indie pattern companies have been able to pivot over time much quicker than these large companies have, who've been around for 100 years. And that's just kind of the nature of the world, I guess. If you think about Blockbuster Video versus Netflix, back in the 1990s, there was a Blockbuster Video store on every single street corner, and all of us went to that store to rent a DVD or a VHS tape and bring it home and watch our movie, and then we take it back. And along came Netflix and said, "Oh, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to send them through the mail." And then they, of course, eventually moved to live streaming, and that whole industry pivoted. In the 90s, you would have never guessed that a giant like Blockbuster Video would have disappeared, but they are gone, no longer. And I think that's the change that's happening in the sewing industry right now. These tissue paper patterns, it's not coming back. It's just not. There are no other facilities in the US that can print tissue patterns. I know in Canada, there's a couple companies that use the thicker paper patterns, such as J. Lee. And I have used that brand before. The paper is actually great. And I made that choice when I printed the first few designs that I did. I printed on paper, and they're still available for a short time, but they're going away soon, because PDF is the future of sewing. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Technology is getting better. It's getting easier to print them off. It's getting easier to be more accurate with the sizing and the measurements and all those kinds of things. And that's not going to change. That's just going to continue to get better and better. So if you have a big stash of paper sewing patterns, you can hang on to them. Obviously, you might use them someday. Most people own many more than they've actually sewn, which creates storage problems. And the tissue paper, of course, degrades over time. And once you made the alterations on it, then, what do you do with it? It's not going to fit the next person down the road, all those kinds of things. So a couple things you should know about PDF sewing patterns is, number one, they're not as difficult to use as you might think. Number two, it's so easy to print them off. You take the pieces together. It's like a puzzle. You work from left to right. I have another video on this on my channel. You can look for it here. You cut it out and you can make your adjustments to it. I like the heavyweight paper. Regular computer paper is about 30 weight, I believe. Is what I buy, and I like that. It's a little bit stiffer, so it's hard to hold it up to you to make adjustments, but it's easier to cut around. I don't even pin my paper patterns down. I trace around it with a piece of chalk on the fabric and then cut it, or a number 2 pencil. Both those work, and it's super easy, and you can't do that with tissue paper. It saves me time, it saves me steps, and I think that once you open your mind to it, get used to it, you will find that it does the same for you. So that's what's happening. If I hear anything new about the status of tissue paper patterns, I will certainly do another video and let you know. However, a couple things you should think about too. These big 4 pattern companies, well, they were the big 4, is now the big 1. So they were consolidated a couple of years ago, I believe it was, into one company. And then that one company has been sold. So if you notice, their website, such as butterickpatterns.com, is no longer, if you are searching for that, the actual domain is somethingdelightful.com, which makes no sense, right? It has nothing to do with sewing. It has nothing to do with patterns. So something's up. Something's coming down the pipe with the change in their domain. I realize that Vogue and Butterick and McCall's, all those names are been around for so long, they're probably held in copyright somewhere else. But Something Delightful has nothing to do with any of that. And this company, now it's this one company that had the one factory that was printing tissue paper patterns. They got a problem. And I'm guessing that it's not going to be an easy fix. It's very hard for the larger companies to pivot, as we talked about earlier. So that's the latest, and please subscribe to my channel so that you know what's coming up. I have new patterns coming out, and I have some other kind of things going on in the sewing industry that I'm noticing, and I'm going to start talking about them. I'm not big on controversy generally, but I think it's time to start chatting about some of the stuff that's going on in the sewing industry and things that you would want to know about. Anyhow, that's all for today. I'm glad you're here. You guys have a great week. Leave me a comment. I'd love to know what you think about this, if you are team paper or team PDF. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.